Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Todd Klindt's SharePoint Netcast number 182, recorded live on Monday, December 16th, 2013. I am your host, with a heart 3 sizes too small, Todd Klindt, and all of this whole thing is brought to you by the fine folks at Rackspace. All the equipment, even this fancy shirt that's a logo for something, I don't know what, Rackspace gave this to me. So you go out to sharepoint.rackspace.com, check out all the great stuff they've got out there. There's free training, there's white papers, there's videos and pictures, and then there's also some information about all the great things that we do with SharePoint at Rackspace. So go to sharepoint.rackspace.com, tell them Todd sent you. There's even like a little chat thing in there. You can chat with those guys if you get bored, get lonely at night. I do that sometimes. The house is dark, everybody's asleep, and I just kind of feel all alone. Get in there in the chat box, see what those guys are doing. But always putting fresh content up there, always putting new stuff at sharepoint.rackspace.com. All right, on to the production notes. Not a lot on the production notes. Got everything out on Friday, got the blog post out, and got the RSS feed out there. So not much out there. So you jerks, when I blogged 180, I think, when I put the audio and video entry in the blog post, I didn't actually put the links in there, and none of you jerks told me. So next time you see that happen, shoot me an email, or send me out a tweet at Todd Klindt, something like that. And let me know. Also, if you are the type, you can get my netcast on YouTube. You can go to youtube.com/Todd Klindt Netcast if you want to consume it that way. I've found that way is a great way to consume it on your big screen TV. Everybody's TV can play YouTube these days. Hell, even my toaster can play YouTube and Netflix. So if you want to watch this in full, 60 inch or whatever, you can do that on YouTube, or you can download these, whatever. But you can get it that way. Also, we'll just jump right into our topics. You can also get the old Netcast if you've got a Windows phone. So, like I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I've got a Windows Phone app out now. So you can load it up that way. You can see right now in Fair Ames, Iowa, it is 21 degrees Fahrenheit, not the fun 21 degrees centigrade, which is pretty warm, upper 60s. No, this is the 21 degrees that's Fahrenheit with it being cold. But I do have my fancy Todd Klindt app here on the phone. Let's load that up. Let's see what's going on there. So I scroll down to Todd Klindt. See it right there, Todd Klindt SharePoint dealio. It's on there somewhere. So information about me, that's pretty boring. Look, blog post, the netcast is there, but that's boring. We don't want to do that. We want to look at it, watch it. It's right there on your phone. You just click it, boom, and you get me if you want to watch it. So there it is. It's going to spool up, and then it's going to come on sideways, and I'm going to get it wrong. Oh, yep, see? So look how easy that was. See how great? That's some super stuff there. So if you got a Windows phone, go out to the Windows Store and look for my name, and you'll see my podcast out there, and you can get the app also. Trevor in the chat room is asking if this is Windows Phone 8 only. Sadly, it is Windows Phone 8 only. I don't, and I built it with that online apps.windowsstore.com deal, and I don't think that makes Windows Phone 7 compatible apps. But great, a reason to upgrade. And we've talked about this before on the show here. I'm a recent Windows Phone convert. I switched over here 2 or 3 months ago. Loving it. Got a Lumia 920. Couldn't be happier. But if you've got AT&T as your carrier, or even if you don't, you can go out to Amazon or a couple of other places, and you can get a Lumia 520, which is really close to as awesome as this phone. Not quite, but super close. And you can get that thing for next to nothing. So getting it for $100 used to be a big deal, and then you could get it for like $80, and I bet you can probably find it someplace for $60. But the great deal about that is when you buy it on Amazon, you can buy it as a pay-as-you-go thing. So you can, it comes with AT&T's Go Phone thing, so it's a monthly thing. If you've got an AT&T contract like I do, I bought you can buy the phone and just drop your AT&T SIM in, and it'll just work. That's what I did. Also, you can completely set the phone up and do everything with it with no phone service at all. So that's what I did with mine. So when I bought this 920, I was going to buy a 520, but then I told somebody, and they're like, hey, I got this 920 that I'm trying to sell. And so I bought the 920, completely set it up with no SIM card in it. So all I needed was wireless access. So I set it up, updated it, set my email up on it, could have downloaded my app if it would have been out then, and was able to use it as, you know, a little tablet, a phone that can't make phone calls for a couple of weeks before I actually switched my SIM over. So Lori in the chat room is saying at the online Microsoft store, you can get that Lumia 520 for $50. So even if you don't have a SIM to put in it, you can spend the $50 and you've got yourself a pretty awesome MP3 player and all that kind of stuff. So, and in the chat room, Lynn Dye is saying that it was time for me to leave Android. Lynn, you're absolutely right. I'm down to one Android device right now, one Android device, and that's a little tablet here, a little 7-inch tablet. I asked Santa for a Dell Venue 8 Pro for Christmas, and if I get that, then I will be completely done with Android devices. So. But again, if you want to try out Windows Phone 8 on the cheap, and who doesn't, it looks like right now if you go to the Microsoft Store online, it's $50, and that's with no contract. So you don't have to. Now there's other ways to do it with a contract, but $50 is all it takes. So if you do that, load up the app, and if you've loaded up the app, and I noticed a couple of you folks in the chat room have, thank you very much. I've only got one review out there. So if you like the app, go ahead, give me some stars, however many it deserves, and leave a little note, because that certainly helps when other people take a look at it. So wasn't necessarily going to talk about it, but there's been a lot of conversation in the chat room, and I did mention a little bit. The Dell Venue Pro, that is the new-ish, it's been out for a couple of months now, 8-inch Windows 8.1 Pro tablet. So it's... So pardon my shame, this is actually an Android device, but it's approximately this size. So this is a 7-inch device, but the Dell Venue Pro is 8 inches. But it's running full Windows, so it's running Windows 8.1 Pro, the whole thing. So anything that you can run on a laptop or a desktop or whatever will run on this Dell Venue 8 Pro. And it comes with 32 or 64 gig of storage, and then I think 2 gig of RAM, something like that. And it's a pretty sharp little device. There's a bunch of different sales out there for it, and depending on where you get it, things like that, you can get them for around $300. But it's just a fun little device. It's got great battery life. I think the advertised battery life on it's like 9 hours, something like that. So for a guy like me that does some traveling, these kind of devices are great for watching videos on the plane and things like that. I could do all that with my tablet. And actually, now that I've switched to the Surface Pro 2, I probably could. But what I don't want is, I don't want to listen to music on the plane or watch videos or something and do it on my phone and then get to wherever I'm going and have my phone be dead. So that's why I like these little devices like this. That Dell Venue Pro only has a mini USB port on it, and it's that way for charging. And that's also, it's got a port on it that's called USB to go, or USB on the go, excuse me. You might see that as OTG. So that is charging, and it's where you hook up peripherals. And Mike Gennady, who's a SharePoint guy, works for Microsoft in their Philadelphia office, recently got one of these little devices, loves it, and he's been showing off some cool things that you can do with it. So one of the cool things you can do is you can get a dock like I've got for my Surface Pro 2 here that's got USB hub, and mine's got an HDMI and a DVI. Plug it in there. So he's got his Dell Venue 8 Pro with its screen powering 2 other screens, and he's just using it like a regular computer, got a keyboard hooked up to it, all that kind of stuff. So that's pretty cool. The other thing that it's got built into it is it's got this wireless display technology called the Miracast, M-I-R-A-C-A-S-T. And Miracast is something that's also built into the Surface Pro 2, but this Dell has it also. So it's a wireless display. So he's got another video where he's got his Dell Venue Pro. He's got a little Netgear Miracast box, and he just acts like he's adding a monitor, acts like it's connected, except it's not because it's wireless. It finds the little net gearbox, and poof, it shows up on his monitor. So it's really great. And you got this little thing, but you can throw stuff all over. So he's using the Netgear, and I forget the name of the box by Netgear that he's using for Miracast. If you go to like Amazon and search for Miracast, that's the one that shows up. But I saw yesterday somebody tweeted it, and I apologize. I missed the name, and I didn't think I was going to talk about this tonight, so it's not in my notes. But Best Buy, their house brand, they have a couple house brands, Dynex and Rocketfish. Rocketfish has a Miracast receiver as well, and I bought one last night off BestBuy.com for $20. And so this is just another device. It's just got power and HDMI. You hook it up to a monitor or a TV, and then if you've got a Dell Venue Pro or a Surface Pro 2 or any other device that uses Miracast, and that's a standard, it's not a Microsoft thing, for $20 you can wirelessly send video, so you can watch Netflix or whatever you want to do on it wirelessly. So that's some pretty cool technology that's out there right now. So I ordered one of those Rocketfish Miracast things. I should have that in a couple of days. But then once I have that, then I'll be able to, with my Surface Pro 2, whatever TV that's hooked up to, just across the network, hit a button, and it'll just show up. So pretty cool technology. But that little Dell tablet will do that as well. And got some folks in the chat room. I've been talking about that Lumia 520, and yeah, so it's $50 on Amazon or $50 on at the Microsoft Store. And again, for $50, it's just a great little MP3 player. I don't remember how much storage it has or anything like that, but for $50, and it's a great way to try the Windows Phone OS, see if your applications that you need are out there. I switched over from Android. I have this poor, sad Android phone here. A little Galaxy 2 Skyrocket there, and what I found is that there is, on the Android side, there is an app from Microsoft, and I forget the name of it, but if you search in the Android Play Store for Microsoft, there's an app there that you run that will load up, will look at all the applications you have installed on Android. And then on the Windows Phone side, they've got an app that takes that and then tells you all the Windows Phone apps that match up. So you can just load them all up that way. So I didn't take them all because, like everybody, I had a ton of apps on my Android phone that I just never used. I installed once, never tried again. So I just jettisoned all of those. But it did show me some other apps that I didn't know existed, and so it was easy to use. So J-Shock in the chat room brings up an interesting thing. As far as I can tell, there is one other person on the planet using Miracast. And if there was such thing as like a Miracast evangelist or somebody who's obsessed with Miracast, that would be Rafael Rivera, and you can find him at withinwindows.com. And he has got again, he's just obsessed with Miracast. If you follow Rafael on Twitter, I think he's got like a goal that every other one of his tweets has to be about Miracast. But he's got a bunch of stuff out there. He shows how to set it up and some problems with it and things like that. And he wrote a really great, him and Paul Thurrott are writing a Windows 8.1 book. You can find that out there. Good stuff if you've got Windows 8.1. And they're doing, Paul and Raphael are doing a crowdsourced thing, sort of. So when you buy their Windows Phone book, they're in the process of writing it now. And as chapters get done, edited, and formatted, you can download them. And which is really nice. But the other great thing is they're selling it directly, and you can pick how much you pay for it. So they've got a page where you choose how much you're going to pay for the book. They've got a suggested price, but this is genius. I love this. They've got a suggested price, and then they've got, if you pay with PayPal, they've got a little slider. You can slide it higher or lower if you want to pay more or less for the book. But it's pretty great. They've got a page that you go to, and they tweet out when there's updates, when new chapters are added, and you just download it. They've got Mobi, EPUB, PDF, all those versions. When it's done, they're going to put out a Kindle version also. But that's great. And I, as a guy who's self-published, and when Paul was kind of concocting this idea last year at Tech Ed, him and I kind of sat down, and I had recently just self-published my book. And so as somebody who's done that same thing and gone down that same road, I wish them a lot of success. So if you've got Windows 8.1, I highly recommend going out and downloading their book. And it's got its own URL, and I can't remember what the URL is. Somebody in the chat room find that for me. But the book, go out there. It's just a couple of bucks. great reference for Windows 8.1, and it's a great way to help this democratic publishing process that's out there now. So a couple folks in the chat room are saying that the Lumia 520 comes with 8 gig of RAM, but it has a SD or micro SD card slot in it, and so you can expand that. My 920 does not have expandable memory, so I had not thought about that. But again, great little MP3 player, great little device to play with and do all kinds of fun stuff with. So I didn't plan on talking about any of that, and the show's half over. But this is good to know, because these are some things that, I just got the Surface Pro and the Windows Phone, and these are things that I'm excited about now, and it's good to know that the people in the chat room are excited about it too, and I'll continue to add more topics about that. But I'm worried if you guys come here for SharePoint and I get excited about Windows Phone and blather on. Oh, and so another thing that I wanted to mention, somebody in the chat room mentioned, that Dell Venue Pro comes with a copy of Office, which is nice. Not that I don't know how easy Office would be to use on an 8-inch screen, but it is there. So, got that. Okay, now on to actual SharePoint content. The stuff you guys came here for. That and to see me rocking a Santa hat. Ugh. My head gets so hot in the Santa hat. So the big news, I think, in the last week or so is that Microsoft blessed us. We got our Christmas wish early this year. They've released their patches, their December patches for SharePoint 2010 and sort of for SharePoint 2013. So I'll put in the chat room here, don't everybody crash my server at once. There's the link for the SharePoint 2010 patch. That is www.toddklindt.com/SP2010 December DEC 13 CU. I apologize for that. And the SharePoint 2013 version is www.toddklindt.com/SP2013 DEC 13 CU. And of course, if you can't remember that whole random blathering, vomiting of letters and numbers, you can always just go to toddklindt.com/SP2010 builds to get all of those, and toddklindt.com/SP2013 builds to get all of those, and then all that. For SharePoint 2010, that if you install this patch, that puts you at 14.0.7113.5000. And if you install this on SharePoint 2013, you better just have Foundation, because Server and Project were not out as of the 16th. But your Foundation server will be 15.0.4551.1508. And I believe the October CU for SharePoint 2013 was also 4551, but it was like 4551.1000 or something. But some good fixes in here. Trevor Seward in the chat room, one of his favorites is there was a change with the incoming email timer job in SharePoint 2013 where you couldn't have it enabled on multiple servers. It would lock itself out. I believe that's remedied now. I meant to talk to Trevor about that and get my wiki updated. But these patches have been out for almost a week now. Haven't seen any huge issues with them. Again, for SharePoint 2013, the server and project server patches are not out yet, but the Office Web Apps patch is. And once again, I will continue promising that I will add the Office Web Apps to my builds page, even though I haven't done it. They're all in a OneNote. I've got a OneNote that's got them all in it. I just need to figure out if I'm putting it on the SharePoint 2013 page, if I'm putting it on its own page. I just haven't decided how to do all that yet. But I've got all the information. Once I got that figured out, I'll put that out there so we can keep track of that. But as always, you can subscribe to, I've got a Twitter feed for each one of these, so at SP2010 patches will be tweets only about those, and at SP2013 patches will only be tweets about those. So like this last week when those came out, I tweeted that out with links and things like that. So if you want to subscribe to those, that's all I ever tweet about there. And if you have installed the patch, if you've had, like Trevor's pretty good, he finds a lot of the new things in there. I've got the wiki out there for every one of these patches with the notes and the regressions and all that kind of stuff. If you find something, if you have a problem, shoot me an email, todd.klindt@rackspace.com, or hit me up on Twitter @ToddKlindt and let me know. If you got a blog out there, I'll publish it. I'll link to it and everything. But that's kind of the place to keep track of all that. So would love to hear about it, of course. Test these patches, as always, lots and lots before you put it in production. But look to be pretty good stuff so far. Speaking of patches, I don't normally talk much about client-side patches. And I'll be honest, I don't much apply client-side patches, and that's probably why. But this month's Patch Tuesday, so December, whatever the last, the Tuesday was those patches came out, had one particularly important one for this kind of crowd, sort of. And this is a patch for the Office client, so we're talking about Word, Excel, those kind of devices. And this is the Security Bulletin MS 13-104. And why this is important to us is because if you're using SharePoint Online, Office 365, for the last year or so, there's been this nasty little exploit that the bad guys could use where they could steal your SharePoint Online authentication token and then use it for nefarious deeds. So essentially what happens is they're able to trick the Office client. So, you get an email and it says, hey, please open up this Word doc and, tell me what you want on the lunch menu for Friday, whatever. And it's an official looking work thing. You click it, you put in your SharePoint Online credentials, and then really those credentials, that claim, so it's going out, it's getting the claim token and all that kind of stuff. But then the nefarious server, the bad guys, are keeping that token. And then they can use that token to get back into Office 365 as you. So yeah, there's been a couple of links in the chat room about it already. But it's MS 13-104. And so again, that's for client side, the Office clients, not the Office servers. And as far as I know, that exploit only happens with Office 365. There's a pretty good write-up on it. There's a couple of blog posts. But if you've got any Office 365, if you're doing the hybrid thing, you're going to want to get that patch out as quickly as you can. I read a blog post earlier today by one of the security firms that first found it, and they found this exploit like 6 months ago and worked with Microsoft. So it's that whole thing that, they were being good guys. They found the exploit. They were able to repeat it. They were able to figure out what the problem was. They reported it to Microsoft and then didn't say anything about it until the patch was released. So the bad guys didn't know. But now it's out there. People know about it. So get that out there. If you've got the Office clients, the Office 2013 clients, patch that up. All right. So I've gotten a couple of questions about this lately, and I apologize that I don't have a lot of great information about this. But have gotten a couple of questions about how to configure SQL drives and that kind of stuff for performance and things like that. And it was a very timely question when I got it because, as I've been mentioning, I'm going to have a article on SharePointProMag.com about installing SQL for SharePoint, configuring SQL for SharePoint. So I'd done a bunch of this research already, but it was a customer asking about where they should put certain databases and how they should lay out the drives in their SQL box and all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to just kind of touch on this, and I apologize. There's a piece of the notes that I don't have here. I forgot to look them up and then realized that right before I went on air. So the reason that this is an important question, important to understand, is that your performance and we're talking on-premises SharePoint here, your performance from on-premises SharePoint mainly is determined by SQL, unless you're doing something horribly wrong, like trying to run web front ends with 4 gig of RAM or with 100 meg single duplex network or something like that. If everything is okay on the SharePoint side, your performance is really dictated by SQL because everything that you're clicking and loading and saving and interacting with, that's all in SQL. So if SQL's in bad shape, SharePoint's going to be in bad shape. So one of the things that you can do to make SQL perform better for SharePoint is intelligently lay out your drives. So I'm going to assume that your SQL Server has enough RAM. I'm going to assume that your SQL Server has enough CPU. We're not kind of talking about those things. These questions that this customer gave me were specifically around drive layout. The interesting thing about this is if you don't do a lot of research in it, your gut tells you you've got these big content databases and it's got all your content in it. Every time somebody opens up a Word doc or saves something, it comes out of one of these content databases. So that's where all your performance should be, right? Well, the irony of that is that your content databases are not not a big part of all that. They can honestly be on some of the slowest drives that you've got, depending on how you have things laid out. There's some non-obvious things that you want to tweak first. And what I tell folks is probably so let's, if you read any non-SharePoint SQL documentation, they've all got guidelines on how you should lay out your SQL stuff. And I talk about it a little bit in the article on SharePoint Pro Mag. But if you follow those guidelines, you end up having to have like 12 drives in your SQL box. And that's really without any drives for content. That's just, all this other stuff. So it's not really feasible to do it the best way. So you have to kind of compromise. You've got, you've got budgetary constraints and things like that. So what a lot of SQL servers end up having is tiers of drive space. So back in the old days, it was, 10,000 RPM drives and 15,000 RPM drives, things like that. These days, we've got solid state drives, SSDs. And so they've become pretty mainstream. And so now we've got this idea that, you've got a SQL box and you've got a certain amount of money and you're going to have, so many terabytes of storage for SharePoint, all that kind of stuff. But you can afford a little bit of the good stuff. You can get a taste of that SSD. You don't have a lot of money for it, but let's say you can afford, a couple hundred gig of SSD. And so you buy it. Where should you use that? Where can you put those SSDs and what can you put on those SSDs to best help your SharePoint environment? And folks in the chat room are kind of ahead of me, though I'm gonna give Brian LaLancette, it was close. I'm gonna give him half credit. He said that you should put your TempDB, SQL's TempDB, on those SSDs. And that's one of those things as SharePoint guys we don't think about SQL databases much, specifically TempDB. But TempDB is sort of SQL scratch space when it's doing really important things. It's kind of how it writes on its hand so it doesn't forget stuff, and then it gets done whatever it's doing and it erases it all off. These are core gut SQL things that are going on. So if you only have a little bit of fast drive space, then I'm going to suggest that your TempDB log files should go on there, and that's going to be those fast reads and writes and all that kind of stuff. And if you can get your TempDB log, your transaction logs, the LDF files for your TempDB on fast drives, that's kind of the first thing. The next thing that you want to do is get the TempDBs themselves, the MDFs, on there. Now, conventional wisdom is that you don't want to have the LDFs and MDFs, the log files and the database files, on the same, what we used to call spindle, but the same physical drive, because then you get read and write contention as the logs are being committed to the databases. With SSDs, that's not quite as bad. It's better if you can have them on separate channels and all that kind of stuff. But if you want to put them on one, if you've got a 400 gig SSD, you don't need 400 gig of TempDB log files, most likely. So having those on the SSD is good. That's when I talk to like the SharePoint Online guys and some of those guys, they always talk about the best performance gain that they've ever gotten is by putting TempDB on fast drives. Nothing SharePoint, just TempDB. Now, the folks in the chat room are mostly in agreement with me, but they did want me to mention that with SSDs specifically, there are a couple different kinds of them, MLC and SLC and all that kind of stuff. But SSDs do have a finite amount of reads and writes. I mean, it's in the hundreds of thousands of all that. But SSDs don't act like regular physical drives do. There's a little more hand holding. There's wear leveling and there's trim that you have to have turned on and things like that. So if your fast drives in your SQL box are actually SSDs, do some research on that before you jump in there. Know what you're getting into. SSDs aren't as bad as they used to be. I remember the first SSD that I bought for my old laptop failed twice on me, but since then, I've had a bunch of them. Hell, everything's got SSDs now, and I don't have any problems with it at all. But if that is what your fast drives are, research it a little bit. Spend 20 minutes looking into it. There's some good stuff out there on it. But that was one of the things I wanted to mention, is that the temp DB, getting that onto the fastest drive possible for your SQL box is going to give you huge returns. And so that's going to be things like when timer jobs run and when scheduled tasks run. There's a lot of places inside of SharePoint where SharePoint doesn't actually do the work. You'll have a timer job or something kick off, and what SharePoint will actually do is say, hey, SQL, you've got a stored procedure over there. Run that. Don't bother me with the details. I'm not going to do anything. You run that stored procedure, and when you're all done, just tell me what the results are. And those kind of things, when they run, those are the things that benefit from the fast drives. Brian asks a good question in the chat room. Do you still need to create multiple temp DBs if using SSD, or is it more a matter of number of cores? So back in the bad old days, when we had SQL servers that had like 2 and 4 cores, the conventional wisdom was that you should have a temp DB for each core. The idea was that you didn't want a core sitting around doing nothing because it was waiting to write to a temp DB that another core had thread locked. So you wanted to have a temp DB for each core. That really hasn't been the case for a couple of versions of SQL now, and it has to do with how SQL has changed, but it also has to do with the fact that we have SQL servers these days that have 32 cores and 64 cores, and it's just not, having 32 temp DBs doesn't do you any good if all 32 of them are on the same drive. And none of us out there can probably have 32 drives just for temp DB, and then our SharePoint databases and all that. So for that particular one, I don't feel qualified to give you a full answer, but if you go to SQLskills.com, that's Paul Randall and Kimberly Tripp's company. Within the last couple of years, I believe Paul has had a blog post on some better temp DB guidance on how to scale all that stuff out. And so read that. And Trevor in the chat room brings up a good point. What you should end up doing is, have a couple of temp DBs, and then pay attention to your SQL box. See how performance is. If you have a lot of wait times on those temp DBs, maybe you need more. Things like that. But I'll be honest, most folks aren't lucky to have that kind of time to check that those kind of things. But that is the ideal way to do it. But SQLskills.com, and check Paul Randall's blog, and he's got a blog post that specifically addresses this, but probably some other ones as well. So then, after you get those temp DB databases off onto their own fast drives, if you've got more fast drives, there's kind of a hierarchy of what SharePoint databases should go on fast drives. And so we're looking at things like your search databases. The logs should be on a fast drive because those are the databases when your farm is doing a crawl, that's where the results are being written. So if you want your crawls to take less time, put those log files on fast drives. Things like that. The config DB, oddly, is a small database, but you want it to be on a very fast drive because it's getting read from and written to a lot. And so you want to get that on fast drives. In the chat room, I linked a TechNet article that talks about the different IOP requirements for the different databases. So IOPs are input-output operations per second. And so you can kind of tell when you've got a bunch of databases like the Secure Store database. That's got almost no IOP requirements. You can put that on a floppy. That's probably not true. But you can put that on a slow drive without it really impacting things very much. But there are other databases that's not the case for. And turns out with content databases, a lot of that stuff gets cached in RAM and all that kind of stuff. The databases themselves can be on fairly slow drives. If you want to help speed things up, put their log files on drives with fast writes. But the content databases themselves, not a big determination for performance. But what I meant to mention is at some point I've written up or I've seen, kind of a hierarchy. Databases that need a lot of speed, databases that don't, and that was what I was hoping to paste today, but I don't have that. But there's a bunch of stuff out there, and you can really give give your SharePoint farm a shot in the arm by driving that, setting that up well. And again, my article at SharePoint Pro Mag is going to talk about that a little better. So this is one of those things where you can tell people that have been putting up with my my netcast and my content for a lot of years. Brian LaLancette, the darling of the chat room tonight, asked, "Hey Todd, by the way, are you still preaching that whole never virtualize SQL thing?" So, you know, I've been doing this SharePoint thing for a while. And back in the SharePoint 2003 days and 2007 days, I had a pretty hard stance on virtualizing SQL and never doing it. And so I've sort of softened on that stance in the last couple of years, basically because of two things, really. Number one, it's like it's a quixotic task these days to convince people not to virtualize SQL. So I stand by my original premise that it is easier to make SQL on physical hardware run fast. It's easier to do that than it is to make virtualized SQL run fast. And so the whole premise of my rant before was that for SharePoint folks, normally we don't know SQL very well. We install it, we get it going, we do the thing that we do know very well, which is SharePoint, put it on that SQL box and just forget about it. But virtualized SQL is sort of a different beast. And so we saw a lot of people virtualizing it poorly, and that was bad performance, sad SharePoint, all that. So I stand by that. That's still the case. But everybody virtualizes everything these days, so I can't go into a customer and say, hey, you should not be virtualizing SQL, because a lot of IT departments have mandates now where everything is virtualized everywhere, unless there's an exception. I mean, that's just the way that they are these days. So so I've kind of softened on that. Jack in the chat room is asking, has the issue typically been the virtualization piece or the SAN piece or whatever? A little of both, though it could have been a problem with DAS, direct attached storage. The thing is, when you virtualize SQL, there's just a lot more crazy things to worry about, because it's and the storage is a big part. Now if you have virtualized storage, you know, that's going to make things more slow. Can you align your partitions? All those things that you have to worry about. But part of it was storage, all that. So that's the number one reason that I don't preach it as much anymore, is just because nobody would listen to me. Just wouldn't matter. Number two is because SQL has gotten better at understanding that it's being virtualized, and virtualization software has gotten better at virtualizing things well. And just as a general community, us nerds have gotten better at virtualizing things. And so the hit that you take now is not as bad as it would have been 5 years ago, the performance hit. So I still recommend wholeheartedly, if you're going to virtualize SQL, which I understand is 100% of the people listening to this, Brent Ozar has a great virtualizing SQL video that I recommend twice a month, twice a week probably. And it's based on SQL 2008 R2, but I talked to Brent a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, and he said it's just as pertinent today for the new version of SQL as it was for this one. But it talks about some of those crazy things that we never think about when we virtualize SQL. Like, it's possible to have too many CPUs if you're virtualizing SQL, things like that. So Brent's video is 70 minutes, something like that. I highly recommend watching it. I have literally watched it a dozen times, and it's good stuff start to finish. And so if you're going to virtualize SQL, which I think is everybody, watch that video. I'll have it in the show notes and all that. It's good stuff. So Brian, my position on it has softened a bit. I don't scream at people and throw stuff at them like I used to. I just kind of snicker at them under my breath, you know. So one other piece of this, the customer was asking about, was what to do with blobs. And so what they were really asking was, can I use RBS, the remote blob store, and make things super fast? Here's the deal about RBS. It's expensive. You need to buy a provider. You don't want to use the free file stream provider. It's not ready for prime time. So RBS is expensive. RBS is scary, because as soon as you introduce RBS into your SharePoint farm, all of your disaster recovery stuff goes right out the window. Everything that you know about SharePoint disaster recovery changes with RBS. So know that, and then test it and all that kind of stuff. Because speed is nice, but being able to restore is even nicer. So RBS is expensive and it's scary, and it doesn't in any way guarantee better performance. So RBS was not created to improve SharePoint performance. RBS was created to make SharePoint storage less expensive, potentially. So it's not, you can have a slow RBS provider, you can have a fast RBS provider. RBS does not in any way, shape, or form guarantee better performance. But if you want to go that route, there's some great third parties out there, but it's going to cost you a bunch of money up front. It's going to cost you a bunch of money in maintenance, and from a high availability disaster recovery standpoint, it's going to be a whole lot more work. So the other thing that I did talk about though with this customer was for blobs, if they're not already haven't turned on blob caching, that's something that's free in SharePoint. Trevor Seward's going to link a project he's got in CodePlex on it in the chat room here in a minute, so I can put that in the notes as well. But blob caching is something that's free with SharePoint. When you install SharePoint, it puts everything in place in the web config for the web app. It just shuts it off. You go in there and turn that on. You also want to set the expiration, the age limit on that. It doesn't put that in there, but you want to do that. But the blob caching just says to the web front end, once you pull that blob from SQL, save it on the local disk for a certain amount of time, and then in subsequent requests serve it from disk instead of from SQL. And his project, free project, is blobcache.codeplex.com, and that adds a nice little interface and central admin to SharePoint 2010 and 2013, or if not, it will soon, to manage that, because it's a little ugly to manage. But the great thing about the blob caching is it's not expensive, it's free, it's built into SharePoint, it's not scary in that it doesn't really hurt anything, but if you somehow, when you cache, you always run the risk of getting poor results. If something happens crazy with that, you can just go in there and shut it off, and everything's fine. All you got to do is turn it on. And then, again, if you've got these fast drives sitting around somewhere, you can control where that blob cache goes, so you can put that on a fast drive if you want to, and that will help a little bit. So Trevor says it does support both 2010 and 2013 now. So that's great, and it just adds a little interface. Otherwise, you got to go into your web config, or you got to use PowerShell or something to configure that. But that makes a tremendous difference, turning the blob caching on. And the December 2013 cumulative update, I think for both 2010 and 2013, fixed some blob cache error stuff, erroneous errors. So it's all good to go. Big fan of that. Been around since SharePoint 2007 at least, and big fan of that. Free performance. So thanks to the couple people who asked me about that this week. That was a good topic. One final, we'll just move right into the shameless self-promotion part of the Netcast. So as I've told you guys, I'm doing a couple of sessions at the big SharePoint conference in March. Pretty excited about that. Finally got my profile filled out at SharePointConference.com, so my picture shows up. It says that I work for Rackspace, all that good stuff. And so you can go out there. I'm doing, so the SharePoint conference is $2,000. Great, best money I'll ever spend. I'm doing 3 sessions, doing a load testing session. I'm doing an upgrade session and then a PowerShell session. And then for another $500, I think, you can go to a pre-conference session, and that's 8 hours of Shane and I doing an install and configuration and answering questions and all that kind of stuff. So the SharePoint conference proper is March 3rd through the 6th, 2014, and it's at the Venetian in Las Vegas. And you can go to SharePointConference.com and sign up for that. And I apologize that I didn't plan ahead better, but I've just seen the chat room that Vlad of SharePoint Community is going to be there. So now you got to go. And I apologize because I can't pronounce Vlad's last name, and I'm not going to try. But Vlad's going to be there. You don't want to miss out. I'm going to be there. Vlad's going to be there. Lori's going to be there. All kinds of the Netcast hooligans are going to be there, so you don't want to miss that. So the SharePoint conference itself is March 3rd through the 6th, and then the pre-conference is March 2nd. So that's right beforehand. Going to be good stuff out there. Also, working with the folks, going to be doing something with the Netcast, going to be doing a live recording out there, working with the SPC TV folks. Talked to them just today about that. So if you're going to be at the SharePoint conference, come find us. I think Rackspace maybe will have a booth. I don't know. I haven't heard. But come find me, and we'll do a recording. We'll do it out proper. So that'll be a good time. Looking forward to that. So that is the SharePoint conference, March 3rd through the 6th at Las Vegas. So the next big deal that I'm doing is SP TechCon, and that is April 22nd through 25th. That's in San Francisco. I think I'm also doing a pre-con there. I don't remember. A bunch of that happened while I was out on paternity leave. So yeah, I think I'm doing something 22nd. I don't know. But going to be at SP TechCon regardless. Doing a bunch of sessions, maybe doing a pre-conference. That's in San Francisco, downtown San Francisco. Always a great little conference. SharePoint conference is huge. Going to be 10,000 people. Going to be all kinds of exciting. SP TechCon is going to be about 1,000 people. It's going to be way more intimate and in the good way, not in the creepy way. And you're going to, there's all kinds of great topics there. The classroom sizes are smaller, so they feel more friendly. It's easier to, interact with people and speakers and all that kind of stuff. Been doing the SP TechCons for 5 years now. I think this is like number 10, something like that. I look forward to it every year. Hopefully we'll also be doing a live netcast there. Kind of talk to them a little bit about that, but that should be happening as well. And then finally, the next month, so that was in April, in May, we got the whole Tech Ed deal going on in Houston. So May 12th through the 15th in Houston is the North America Microsoft Tech Ed. Going to be doing some sessions there as well. Going to be doing a pre-conference session. And then who knows what else they'll let me do while I'm there. And so that's a good conference if you're not just a SharePoint person. If you have to do System Center or Exchange or Windows or that kind of stuff, that's Microsoft's big conference for everything. So that is May 12th through the 15th, and you can go to northamerica.msteched.com to find out more details about that and to sign up for that. And hopefully I'll be doing something fun there too. So folks, this is supposed to be a short one because again, I didn't work much last week, but then I got all off chatting about how much I loved Windows Phone and Windows 8.1 and all that, and see, we're bumping up on 50 minutes here. So thanks to the chat room. You guys stayed up a little late for me tonight. I appreciate that, and I'll be sticking around the chat room a little bit after we go off the air. So planning on doing, good deal there. So my birthday is next month. I'm turning 40, and every year, so I've been doing the SharePoint Netcast. It'll be 5 years in March that I've been doing it. So every year for my birthday, some of the hooligans in the chat room behind my back get together and they raise a bunch of funds for charity, and they do it all for me. I do a bunch of charitable giving of my own, and so they said, hey, that'll be awesome if Trevor in the chat room just shouted old. So for a birthday present every year, a couple of folks in the chat room, usually Lori Gowan and Dan Usher, collect a bunch of money, I give them a list of the charities that I donate to, and they pick one of them every year. So they're doing that again this year. Lori's got a big one in here. She's trying to do something big for my 40th. So if you would like to be a part of that and donate to that, go ahead and email Lori. And I never type her email address because it's in my contact list, but it's gowanl@bellsouth.net. Email her, put Netcast or something in the subject line, and she'll tell you what you need to do to get involved in that. I thank you in advance. It's super cool that these guys do this. I can't take any credit for it. It's all them. I just sit back and get older every year. They do all the cool bits, so I appreciate that. But yeah, so that's cool that they're doing that, and I appreciate that. So Vlad has asked me to mention that they're doing their sp24conference.com. It's a free online conference. And I need to submit, I got an email, I need to submit some speaker stuff about that. Vlad, pester me. I got to get in there, submit some stuff. So that's going on. And hopefully I'll get involved with that. I keep meaning to submit some stuff and I keep forgetting. But thanks everybody. Now we really are hitting 50 minutes, so I need to wrap this up. But thanks everybody. I appreciate your time. If you've got ideas about stuff I should talk about, hit me up on Twitter at Todd Klindt, todd.klindt@rackspace.com, all that. And planning on being here next week, so I know that next week is the 23rd of December. Planning on being here. Hopefully get another one or two of these netcasts done this year. So hopefully see you next Monday night. So thanks, everybody. Have a good night.